decision. Okay, so to go over the title search process. So this summarizes it for you to get an idea of what we do on the back end. And so it talks about title search findings, what happens with new construction, and our curative process. So obviously the escrow officer is involved in the curative process of it. And it talks about risk mitigation. This is important to know because if you're selling a commercial property, you're selling a brand new built home, there's going to be more of a timeline for the curative process because there's going to be most likely construction liens, SCRs are going to be crazy. Recently I've been seeing like 20 plus on new builds. And so every single one of those has to be cleared before we can have a clear title policy. So just keep that in mind when you're doing new builds or construction or commercial/construction properties. And then I wanted to kind of go over some turn times. So Davis County, Utah County, Salt Lake County, we can meet that 24 to 48 hour window. But there are counties that are still really archaic and they're not online. So recently we've seen some in the Duchesne County. Those are more towards the 5-day window. And then San Pete is a new one that we've been seeing quite often downstairs, and that's a 2-week turnaround time. So kind of keep that in mind when you're writing the offer. So if you know it's a rural area, it's gonna be anywhere between 5 days to 2 weeks. Because there's no option. Because if someone has to physically go into the county and pull records.
And just on the same page, this is it's like I have a seller and they want to list their house, ready to go get the listing agreement, and I bring this to you.
Yeah.
So 3 days minimum or up to 2 weeks if it's like
rural.
old dummy.
Yeah. So like I said, San Pete or Duchesne or I think like Morgan County is also 2 weeks. The other ones that are about 5 days are Garfield, Wayne, Carbon County can be 5 days. Typically I see that closer to 3. But all those, just because that someone physically has to go and pull archives, that's why it's a delay. It's nothing to do with title company, and any title company will have these issues just because you have to physically go in there.
Same with like a buyer, like if I had a buyer
Yeah.
under contract, and I wanted to just make sure the title is clear, it still take like.
Yep. Yeah. It's just because, like I said, you have to physically go into the counties. So that's another reason to open if you have the seller side and it's a rural property to open as soon as possible, just because then when you go under contract, it's a simple fix of just updating names. We don't have to pull a full search and won't restart the 2-week process.
Sweet.
Okay. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, cool. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
So I'm not a jazz fan anymore.
I know.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
You're gonna say that.
Are they out?
I know, no, but they keep losing. I mean, they've lost.
Two.
They won.
They've
They
lost
won.
2 in a row. They're
Yeah.
on a losing.
Yes. So I just wanted to quickly talk to you a little bit about different loan types, just quickly. There's government loans, which typically are, well, they're just FHA, VA veterans, people that are veterans, great loan, 100% financing, good low rate. FHA, USDA. USDA are the loans kind of out in the country, out in, out in the boonies. Conventional loans is we take an application and we look at someone's profile, we look at their situation, we look at their credit first. That's the first thing we look at. And the credit will kind of determine what loan we end up doing. Really, it's credit and whether or not they have a down payment or how much of a down payment. And that's kind of how we look at that. Credit, okay, they have good credit. Okay, do they have a down payment? And that's kind of the process of elimination, I guess, credit, they have a down payment, great, then their credit score is good, then we're probably going to do a conventional loan. One thing I just wanted to point out on a conventional loan, and really on every loan, is per county, there are loan limits. So you can go right onto Google and search Fannie Mae loan limits. And that'll pull up each county and what the loan limit is for a conventional loan. And you can do the same thing for FHA. I mean, those are the two most common loans, conventional FHA. So you could go right to or Google and say FHA loan limit. And per county, it'll tell you what the loan limit is. And so you'll know if they can do an FHA loan in that county. I mean, right, it's Davis, Weber, Salt Lake, Utah County. And that's kind of, what we're doing mostly. Twila a little bit, Summit up there, we do a little bit. Something to be aware of too, here in Salt Lake County, the jumbo, the loan limit for a conventional loan is 600,300. So if someone's buying $1 million home and they can't put $400,000 down to get to 600,000, then they have to do a jumbo loan. And jumbo loans are there, we do them. The jumbo loans are a great loan. Just keep in mind on a jumbo loan, you have to put 20% down right now. So if someone does buy that $1 million home, they have to put $200,000 down to get that deal. So if they go up to $1 million, 1.5, 2 million or whatever, they gotta have some cash to put down. Any questions?
Do you know what the FHA is?
In Salt Lake County? I knew you were gonna ask that. I don't. I can find out, let you know. Maybe we can Google it. What's that?
I
It's
think it's around 436 or.
in Salt Lake County?
Yeah.
Sounds about right. 420, 430.
Yeah.
Is there a limit on the jumbo loans, or you can just sky's the limit if you have the 20%?
If you have, on the jumbo loans, if you have that 20% down, if you have good credit, if you have some good, so after putting the 20% down, if you have some assets in the bank, yeah, you can go up to pretty much as high as you need to.
Better question.
Yeah.
And on that, is there a limit that you guys want that done? It's like,
No.
oh yeah, sky's the limit, but it sounds like, oh yeah, I want $7 billion loan.
For you, I would do a $7 billion loan. No, that's a good question. No, I want to say 3 or 4 million. I priced one out for a client up in Park City, and he was actually needing a $3 million loan. He had the money to put down. He's still trying to figure it out if he's going to do it or not. But I think the sales price was crazy. It was just an old home right on Main Street or just below Main Street for like $4 million. And he had the money down. He was just trying to decide if he wanted to do it. And believe it or not, jumbo rates are actually pretty good.
What are they?
So here in Salt Lake County, on a conventional loan, you can go up to 548,000 and get the lowest rate. That's the lowest rate. But then they have what they call, each county, you can go up to a high balance limit. High balance takes you up to 600,000 and still is considered a conventional loan. The rate's still pretty good. I priced one out yesterday. It's like to get up to 600,000, it's 3.3. So this is weird. It's crazy. 600 up to 600,000, 3.3. If you're below 548, it was like 3%. It was interesting. I priced out a jumbo one yesterday as well, and it's better than a high balance conventional loan up to 600,000. It was 3.1 as opposed to 3.3. So the jumbo rate is actually pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good. Okay. All right. Thanks.
All right, so for you guys on Zoom, if you'll throw your name in the chat box, it'd be great. All right, here's what we're gonna do today. So today we are going to be talking about activities management, which really is kind of just a sneaky way for me to call time management. But if I advertised the class as time management, none of you guys would have shown up. So we call it activities management. So but we're going to approach it a little bit differently than probably how you have in the past. Now, let me explain to you why this is so important. So I will say, it seems like almost every class I have kind of at the start of it, I say something about this is why this class is so important kind of a thing. And for me, let me just tell you, what I'm going to show you today made a big impact on my business in terms of the amount of hours and things that I was working. So we talked last week about how by switching from focusing on contacts to focusing on setting appointments, how I went from prospecting half as much as I was to doubling my income, even though by switching just that piece. Well, the other piece that plays into it is what we're going to talk about today, is how I was managing my time and tracking it. So keeping track of where your time is spent is really important and what we're going to talk a bit about. So I've got a PowerPoint that I'm going to show you guys here. So let me get that shared and on the screen here real quick. So, all right, so for you guys on Zoom, hopefully you can see this. If you can't, let me know. Otherwise, I'm gonna assume you can. All right, which I'm not looking at the chat box. So if you guys unmute, if somebody puts something in the chat box, if somebody else will unmute, tell us. But
We can see it.
okay, cool, thank you. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. So in talking about this, do you guys want the lights on or off? Off? Okay. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna approach this from a little bit different standpoint. So we're talking about time management, but hopefully I'm gonna make it a little more interesting for you, because if you understand what we're gonna talk about today, it will totally change the way you approach your work and the way that you work. And it will make you way more efficient with your time. So that's the idea of what we're gonna talk about today. So to begin with, we're going to start with this. We're going to talk about Parkinson's laws. So we're going to talk about two of his laws. So let me explain who this is. So this quote you're seeing here was by C. Northcott Parkinson, which I doubt any of you know who he is or have ever heard of him before. But C. Northcott Parkinson was he was going to school to get his doctorate, and he was going to school in England. And as part of his PhD thesis, he was working on studying the naval shipyards. So he did the study around 1930 of the naval shipyards in the port of Southampton, okay? And as he was doing this, what he came across is some principles that we're gonna talk about today that will apply to you and I. And the first one that he found as he was studying was what's called the law of expansion. And here's what it is this quote here is what he said is, work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. So what that means is this: if you and I said we were going to go to work and we were going to be here at the office from, let's just say 8 a.m. until 5 p.m., what he's saying here is that work will expand to fill that time available. So if you say, I'm going to go into the office and be there from 8 until 5, you will show up and find things to do that will keep you busy from 8 until 5. So let me say it a different way. What this is really saying is there is no correlation between work and productivity. So that's essentially what he's saying here is the work will expand to fill the time available. If you allot a certain amount of time to do a job, you will typically take that whole amount of time to do the job. Therefore, there is no correlation between productivity and work, meaning there's no correlation to you being productive because you're at work. That's what this is saying, okay? So let's go to the next piece here. So here's what he found was this. So what you're looking at here now is part of this study that he did. And what he did was, so he looked at, he was studying the Royal Navy, and he looked in 1914, the Royal Navy had 62 ships in commission, okay? And as to work with those 62 ships, there were 146,000 officers and men in the Royal Navy. They had 57,000 dockyard workers. Dockyard and officials and clerks was 3,200, and then the Admiralty officials was 2,000. Now you fast forward 14 years to 1928. 1928, there's been a reduction. Now, sometimes people will say, well, yeah, the reason is because the wars were over, essentially. Okay, and that's fine, but that's not what's important. Just what's important is to notice They went from 62 ships down to 20 that they were using in the Navy. A 67% reduction in the number of ships. Well, then you go to the officers and men in the Royal Navy and you notice it went down from 146,000 to 100,000, or it reduced by 31%. So the ships went down 67%, the number of men went down only 30%. But then now we cross over to the dockyards and workers, and you notice it went from 57,000 workers up to 62,000. So a 9% increase. Then the dockyard officials and clerks went from 3,200 to 4,500, up 40%. And the admiralty and officials, so the upper level, went up 78% from 2,000 to 3,500. Now, why? This is the key thing. Why did the ships go down 67%? But then if you added together the last two columns, you're basically 120% increase.
Real good at looking busy.
That's exactly right. It's essentially that's what, and here's what happens. Now, in any business, now if you guys remember, we started this whole thing a couple of weeks ago talking about business planning, and I said from today forward, you're a business owner, you're not a self-employed person, right? Remember that? Okay. In any business, so including your business that you are running, if it is not managed carefully, what will happen is that we find stuff to do. So in typically like a business, what ends up happening is what you see here with the admiralty officials is the business will become top heavy. Because what will happen is you'll sit in a meeting sometime and somebody will have this idea, you know what we ought to do is we ought to hire somebody to do marketing for me. And then we go out and we hire somebody to do marketing. And we will do all of those kinds of things, and it creates busy work, basically. So going back to this, work expands to fill the time available for its completion. So if you hired somebody in your business, so the reason we're talking about this is twofold. One is you need to understand just for you today, no matter where you're at in your real estate career, if you say you're going to go to the office for a certain amount of time, you'll be there for that whole amount of time, but that does not mean you're productive during that time. The second piece of it, as you do become more productive, you're going to hire an assistant. Well, when you hire an assistant along the way, does the fact that you hire an assistant automatically mean you have enough work for them to do for, let's just say, 8 hours a day? Not necessarily. So guess what's going to happen with them? Work will expand to fill the time available for its completion. They will figure out things to do during that time. Well, then all of a sudden, when you now want to give them another job responsibility, they're going to say what? Yeah, I'm too busy. Therefore, you think, well, then I need to go hire somebody else to go and do this other job and so work will want to expand to fill the time available for its completion. And we tend to go top heavy on hiring more people than what we really need. And therefore, for you, just in terms of you and your real estate career for today, here's what I want you to understand. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. And the next piece of this, meaning you're going to show up and you're going to work on stuff. Like what will happen with agents is stuff like this, is I need to work on my website. And so they will then spend an entire day working on the website. At the end of the day, we feel like, well, I worked the whole day and my website's looking really good. But is that the same thing as being productive? And the answer is no. So I'm bringing your attention to this, and it will make more sense as we keep going, but it's so that you understand that just because you're at work doesn't mean you're productive. Okay. All right. So next, the second law that he found in Parkinson's laws is the law, what we call the law of triviality. Now, the way he said it here, I'm going to change a little bit for us, meaning he was looking at this piece of it, this law that he came up with, the law of triviality. He was studying where or how their meetings would take place. And this actually is true if you pay attention when you go to a meeting, and it almost doesn't matter what meeting it is. And here's the interesting thing. Within the last week for me, I ran a meeting. And right now I'm thinking of it and realizing I did exactly this in the meeting, even though I know this. So my point is it's human nature to want to work it this way. Here's what he found is time spent on any item of the agenda will be in inverse proportion to its importance. That's basically what he said. So what he said is, what he noticed is when the Royal Navy was having meetings, that the time they would spend on, you put out an agenda of here's what we're going to talk about in the meetings. Well, what he found is that the time that they would spend on each item of the agenda was in inverse proportion to its importance, which what that means is this: they would spend the most amount of time talking about the least important things and the least amount of time talking about the most important things. See, what happens is this: if you go to any meeting, and I'm going to tell you how this applies to you in work in your real estate career right now in a second. But if any meeting you ever go to that there's an agenda, if you pay attention, you're going to notice this, is we will tend to put the things on the agenda that are least important first. And we put the most important things at the end. And our thinking is that we're going to put those things first because we're going to hurry and go talk about them and get them out of the way so that we have the whole rest of the meeting to talk about the important stuff. But what tends to happen?
First law.
That's right, is we start talking about the least important things and they take up the whole meeting, okay? That's what tends to happen. So now let me show you an example. Oh, actually, one other thing, and then we'll come back to that. Now, so here's the next thing. You guys have all heard of the 80-20 rule. Where that came from is a guy by the name of Vilfredo Pareto. Vilfredo Pareto was an Italian economist, and he was studying factories in Italy. And what he found was that 80% of the production would come out of 20% of the factories. And 20% of the production would come out of 80% of the factories. So that's kind of where this 80-20 rule came from. And so for you and I, what happens is this: 80% of our time will be spent on activities that only contribute to 20% of our business. And we'll spend 20% of our time on the things that will make an 80% impact. So let me give you an example of that. I have hopefully been sending a message to you guys that working your sphere of influence is the most important thing you can do in terms of prospecting. Yet, what will happen is agents will spend 80% of their time prospecting in areas that only make 20% of their business. And then we spend 20% of our time on our sphere of influence, which actually generates 80% of our business. So what we need to do then is look at it this way. So this chart's kind of showing if these two items here on the left-hand side were to make the greatest impact in your business, that red line is how much time we spend on it. And so we spend very little time on those items, and we spend a whole bunch of time on the items that really don't make any impact in our business. Okay, so now let me show you what this looks like. So I'm going to share with you, this was a study that was done. This came out of the Wall Street Journal. They had done it. They had done this study and they wrote about it in the article. And I'm not going to tell you the name of the article because it'll give away part of the punchline of the story. It's not a joke, but it's the punchline of the story. So what happened was this. Now remember, part of what we're talking about still is this law of triviality. Time spent on any item of an agenda will be in inverse proportion to its importance. Now, how that applies to you guys, though, is your time spent working in real estate is if you don't manage it. If it's not managed, you will spend 80% of your time on things that are going to not impact much into your business. Okay. And so that's the idea of this here as well. Okay. So what happened was this. The Boston School District was having a meeting and they had two items on their agenda. Now, let me back up. Who are the people who end up on school boards? Like, okay, rich people? Who?
Teachers.
Okay, good. So good. So teachers end up on the school boards. Who else?
Well, parents. Right?
And parents. So typically, notice that a school board for school districts, the school board is made up of typically some teachers, faculty, the administrators, the teachers, and parents. So these are not necessarily people that go out and run businesses and things. Okay, so this is just typically it's parents who want to get involved to make sure that their students are learning and that things are happening good and blah, 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 all that stuff. All right, so the Boston School District was having a meeting with their school board. They had two items on their agenda. The first item on the, of the two items, one of the items was a $1.5 million annex, meaning they were going to be building a new building at one of the schools. The other item was a $200,000 item that I'm not going to tell you what it is just yet, but the other item was a $200,000 item. So first one is a building that they're going to build. The second one is $200,000 item. They put the $200,000 item on the agenda first. Okay, so we're going to talk about this, the difference of this $200,000 item. Now, the difference between the one on the $1.5 million item, that annex, the difference between the high bid and the low bid was $200,000. They took the high bid. On the $200,000 item, they took the low bid. So the difference was $10,000. Okay, so let me make sure you understand what's going on. They start the meeting. They spend 57.5 minutes talking about this $200,000 item. So a 1 hour meeting, they spent 57.5 minutes talking about this $200,000 item, and then they chose the low bid. So they saved $10,000. They then spent 7.5 minutes. The meeting went over. So I know my math doesn't add up, but so 57.5 minutes on the $200,000 item, 7.5 minutes on the $1.5 million item, and they took the high bid. Now, what do you think they were talking about for 57.5 minutes that was going to cost $200,000? But the difference between the high and the low bid was 10,000, and they went with the low bid. What do you think they were talking about for 57.5 minutes?
Something dumb, probably.
It was something dumb. So think simple that they would be talking about for 57.5 minutes.
The paint on the walls.
Okay, no, that's a pretty good
Is
guess.
that the actual building that they were, I mean, it was a building like that?
So the 1.5 million was a building.
And that's a picture?
Oh, no, that's
Oh,
not.
it just
no.
ran out.
Yeah, that's just a rent.
Because I was gonna say elevators. If
Yeah.
that was a picture, I'm
No.
like, well, I don't know.
Teachers' pay raise.
Not the pay raises, nope, because again, these are the parents, so I mean.
Where they were going to put the money, or how the money was going to be, assigned.
Well, so yeah, so great point. So the 200,000 item was a specific item. So they were talking about, okay, we're going to buy this, but should we buy the higher price or the lower price? Is what,
Maybe it's playground equipment. I don't know.
think simple.
Chalkboards,
Computers.
What?
chalkboards.
They were going to give to the kids or something.
Okay, no, not good.
Teachers appreciation.
Chalkboard.
That's it.
Chalkboards,
Oh,
toilet paper.
Paper.
They spent 57.5 minutes arguing about toilet paper.
Did they
Which
try?
one, should we get 2-ply or
Oh,
3-ply or
what a
whatever,
waste.
I mean,
Yeah, that's the
Always
way.
one.
Now-
This is legit happened.
this legit happened. Now, but so here's the thing. Now, this could be profound for you if you understand. So here's the question for you. Why did they spend 57.5 minutes talking? Now, this was before COVID, by the way. Okay. So why did, this happened long before COVID. Why did they spend 57.5 minutes talking about toilet paper and then only 7.5 minutes talking about this building? They took the low bid on the toilet paper, but the high bid on the building. Now, why? Why would they spend 57.5 minutes talking about it? And only 7 minutes on the building?
Got carried away.
Okay, yes, but why? You're right on. Why? Why?
Comfort, I don't know.
Say more, when you
kids.
say comfort, say more about that. What do you mean?
Just, I don't know, for their children, or I don't know.
It has to do with the presenter.
Say that again, Rebecca.
It has to do with the presenter, whatever leadership came across on that high bid they were sold on.
So comfort
Okay.
more into expand.
Hey Russ,
Yes.
it's non-consequential, right? That it doesn't matter. So there's no consequence to the decision.
So say more about that. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about the toilet paper, I mean, it doesn't really matter one way or the other. So you can talk about it all day and there's no real risk. The other stuff is where the real value lies. So if you make a wrong decision on the other stuff, there's a huge cost to it.
Okay, good. Because you're right on, Chad. So here's the thing. What he's saying is right on. Does it really matter too much to the kids what toilet paper Meaning like, if you went with the cheaper version of the toilet paper, is it really gonna like ruin a kid's life? But what Chad's saying is right on. In terms of the building though, now remember I said, who makes up the school boards? Parents and teachers, people who,
Yeah.
like, do they understand building codes and zoning and like how to make sure that the building's earthquake proof and all that kind of stuff? Go ahead, Tony.
That's kind of what I was gonna say, is that we are all familiar with toilet paper,
That's
but
right.
we're not familiar with how to, buildings and codes and things like that.
Perfect. You said it, nobody's ever said it better in my class. We're familiar with toilet paper. Every one of us has an opinion about toilet paper. But when it comes to building the building, and actually, let me even say it this way. All of us in the last year have bought toilet paper. Some version, whether you actually bought it or somebody in your household bought it, but toilet paper was purchased. But how many of us spent $1.5 million on building a building in the last couple of years? No. So because of that, we're not familiar with it. Therefore, what Chad said is right on. There's no consequence really to the toilet paper. But if we're talking about our kids, now remember, if it's the parents and we're building a building, we want one that's going to withstand an earthquake. We want to make sure that it's the best building out there. So what I love how you said it, Chad, is let's go with the high bid, because we're probably going to get a better product by doing it that way versus on toilet paper. It's fine. Who cares? So the reason they spent 57.5 minutes talking about toilet paper is we're familiar with it. The reason they took the high bid on the building is we're not familiar with it. Therefore, probably we're getting a better product if we go with the high bid. Now, how does that relate to you in real estate? What that means is this, is you will spend the most amount of time working on things that are familiar. Meaning, I already asked this before, so I already know the answer, but did you learn in real estate school how to sell real estate? No, you learned what?
I'm not.
How to
end up in jail.
How to not end up in jail and how to pass the test. Yeah, that's ultimately what you learned in real estate school. So when you came out of real estate school, are you familiar with the contracts and how to fill them out and what they mean and all those kinds of things? See, we're not familiar with it. But if you think about it in terms of, so now let me tie this back to what we talked about on the lead generation. Remember I had that column that was for the activities phase, which was like, I need to learn how to use the MLS. I need to learn how to fill out the contract. I need to, all of those things are the things that, like, we're familiar with coming to class. Like coming and sitting in a class and being taught, like, is an easy, now, don't everybody get up and leave after I say some of the stuff I'm going to say about attending class in a little bit, but we're not familiar with the actual process of prospecting. We're not familiar with the process of going and presenting. We're not familiar with the process of negotiating contracts. We're not familiar with reducing prices. See, I'm tying this to my morning ascent for you guys that were on. So we're not familiar with negotiating prices. We're not familiar with going out and showing a buyer homes and all those kinds of things. So as a result, we're scared to do it. So no different than we will spend the most amount of time on the least important things. See, putting together a website, I love how Chad said it. There's not really a risk to me doing that, meaning me going and doing that versus filling out a contract wrong and costing your client the earnest money, or they buy a house that then there's all these problems and they feel like it's your fault. Like there's a risk to that. So therefore we feel like, well, if I go spend my time doing this stuff that's not going to hurt me, then it will be okay. But here's the problem. We, at the end of the day, feel like we worked really hard because, well, yeah, I got this great website put together, or I went through and created a list of all the people in my sphere of influence. But does doing that create the income for you? Yes, you got to create your list, but if all you ever did is create lists all day long, is it ever going to get you anywhere? No. So that's the thing. So in terms of real estate, what other things are we familiar with?
Life or in real estate.
Real estate. Meaning, where do we spend our time that we're familiar?
Showing houses.
Okay, so potentially showing houses, as long as they don't ask me to write a contract, I'm comfortable with it, right? Yeah, okay, good. What else?
Searching for property.
Yeah, getting on the MLS and doing searches. Good. What else?
Prospecting.
That you're familiar with that?
Well, we're familiar with
This
her.
one,
No,
I'm
you're weird
making
then.
calls.
But typically, how, and maybe some of you do, but how often do you wake up in the morning excited that you're gonna go call random strangers? Typically, we're not, right? So therefore, I would say we're not familiar with it, because meaning, given the choice of go to lunch or sit and make phone calls or go door knocking, which are you gonna choose? I mean, tell the truth, like you're gonna go, hey, yeah, let's go visit Carmen and whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, good. What other things are we familiar with? How about coming to class? Were any of you like nervous
Yeah.
about coming to class today, that you were gonna come here and I was gonna ask you a question you didn't know the answer to, or that you're gonna get hauled off to jail because you gave the wrong answer? Like, there's no risk in it, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say reading books, studying.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, reading a book. I'm gonna get a book and read about this stuff. Like, all of those things. And here's what happens is, in our mind, we justify it. Well, I gotta know this stuff or else I can't, like, I don't want to go to jail and I don't want to have somebody sue me because of whatever. Okay. So as a result, we spend time doing the familiar things. Now, what are the things we're least familiar with? Okay, good. Writing a contract. What else?
Negotiations of something super crazy.
Well, selling.
Good,
For me,
negotiating.
It's selling myself. Like, why would they choose me over another?
Okay, good.
agent?
Selling yourself. Good. What else?
Listing presentation.
Yeah, going on a
Yeah.
listing presentation. Notice that all of these things that are going to make us money are the things that we're typically unfamiliar with, which is why we will spend 20% of our time, and why work expands to fill the time available for its completion. We'll work on the least important things first and most, and the most important things least and last, because we're unfamiliar with it. Okay, that's the important piece. Okay, so now with that in mind, now let me come back to where we started the class. I had told you that I'm going to share with you some things that I did that made a huge impact on my business. And it was this, what we call a tip analysis. Okay, so that tip is an acronym for a few things that we'll run through and I'm going to talk to you about. But part of what you need to do now, in fact, actually, let me introduce it this way. Any of you ever worked at a law firm or know much about how attorneys work? Like how they bill for time or anything? Anybody familiar with that? Okay.
Yeah, I am. My brother owned his own firm.
Okay, so Rebecca, tell us what you know then, as far as if I'm an attorney and I'm working for somebody, I have to keep track of my time. Do you know details about how that works?
Well, I don't know that I know as much, but I hired an attorney for something, but I hadn't signed anything, and I just had the phone call and I thought it was a consultation, and I got a huge bill in the mail for that phone call. So since then, I've had to make sure that I ask, is this a free consultation? Because every second is billed.
Perfect. Yeah, so here's how it works. Basically what happens is if you become an attorney and you go work at a law firm, you have billable hours. So every attorney is responsible. If you work at, again, if you're working at a law firm, the owners or the partners are going to say for these junior attorneys, you are responsible to generate X number of hours, X number of billable hours. So let's just
And
say.
it could be research. It could be that they're not even talking to me.
Sure, yeah, that's right. But they have to be accountable for those things. So as part of the process, Aiden's throwing his pen around here. Where's it go? So they have to be accountable for that. And they have to be able to show, because here's again, so what Rebecca said, if I was the attorney and you were my client and I billed you for X number of hours, you might come in and say, well, wait a minute, like where was that time? What were you doing to get to X amount of hours? And maybe it is researching, like she said, but I have to be able to account for that to show you, here's what I was doing that caused me to work that many hours for you. Well, they actually have to keep track of it by every 6 minutes. So every 6 minutes that they're working on something, they have to write down, like basically in the last 6 minutes, this is what I was working on. Okay. Now, so keep in mind that. Now we're going to transition that over to real estate. Now, I'm not going to ask you guys to keep track every 6 minutes, But if you want to really be productive with your time and make a lot of money, you're gonna have to do this. Now, here's what this is. So the tip analysis, the T stands for total time. So the first thing you need to keep track of now, and let me explain this to you. This is not something you have to do for the rest of your career, by the way. But if you want to get productive quickly, you need to do this. And here's the other thing is I have a good friend that I actually trained in this. Early on, when I started training real estate agents, which was a long time ago, an agent that I trained in this, I went to lunch with him. It's probably been 2 years ago now, maybe 3. But I went to lunch with him one day and we started talking about this tip analysis. And I asked him, I said, hey, I know that you used to use that a lot. Are you still doing it? And he said, yes. Anytime my business feels like it's off track or like I'm in a slump, I immediately go back to this. So what I'm going to teach you guys you should use this for the next month, maybe 2 months, for you to figure out where you're at. After that, anytime you feel like you're off track, go right back to this. And if you'll do that, it'll get you back into production just like that. Every time, guaranteed. Okay. So the T stands for total time. Okay. So you first have to keep track of like your total hours that you just worked for the day. Okay. Now, the next thing, the I stands for indirectly productive. Now, indirectly productive, what that means is it's not really productive, but it's indirectly getting you there. And I'm going to, once we're done with this, I'll show you what I mean by that in this. I'll show you I'm going to draw a chart on the board here in just a bit. Okay. And then the P stands for productive time. Okay. Productive time is where you are actually, that's where the money is made. Okay. And I'll explain what that means and what that looks like to you in just a little bit. And then the last one that doesn't show up there, but is non-productive. So I don't put that in the tip analysis, but basically think of it this way. Your total hours worked is going to be filled with one of 3 areas. Everything you do that's real estate related in this total time is either going to fall into indirectly productive, or non-productive. Now, I'm going to say this a whole bunch of times, and even with me saying it a whole bunch of times, most of you are still not really going to hear it, but I'm going to keep saying it to do my best to say it. Non-productive is not the same thing as not important. Okay, and I'm going to say that over and over today as we go through this. Non-productive is not the same thing as not important. Meaning, when I say non-productive, that you're going to be spending time doing non-productive things. That doesn't mean just because I call something non-productive, you guys get this negative connotation of like that's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just non-productive. It doesn't mean it's not important. There's still important stuff that you're going to do and have to do that's non-productive. It's just not productive. Doesn't mean it's not important.
Even like going to lunch, that's important. You eat food, but like it's part of your.
But it's
work
not
day.
productive.
It's not productive.
That's
Like,
right.
You're kind of going along the lines of there.
Yep, that's exactly right. Okay. Okay. Oh, good. I was like, why did I have that up there again? Looks like I
So
had it.
otherwise, it's not creating an income.
That's right. In other words, the non-productive, it just means it's not here's how to think of it. Non-productive means if you did it all day, every day, you'll never make any money. That's basically what it means. Okay. So, all right. So let's talk about productive then. What are things if we're looking at our overall time and saying, okay, that's broken down, everything you do in real estate, every minute that you spend working in real estate is going to fall into either productive, indirectly productive, or non-productive. Okay. So what would be the activities then, thus activities management, that's the name of this class. What are the activities that would be productive? I already gave you one of them. Making phone calls. Okay. So Robert said making phone calls. Making phone calls is not productive time.
Writing contracts.
Writing, that would be indirect. What, Robert?
Okay.
Prospecting, making
Yeah,
phone
yeah.
calls, indirectly productive.
Okay.
Okay. So
Making appointments,
okay, good. So listing appointments.
doing presentations.
Okay, good. So I'll just bring them up rather than asking you guys. Okay, good. So here's so productive is going to be listing appointments or buyer appointments. Okay. Also, showing property to a buyer who has signed a buyer broker agreement is productive. Okay, and in fact, for you guys that were on Morning Ascent this morning, I talked about working with highly qualified buyers. That means people who have signed a buyer broker agreement, we want to do that, okay? Price reductions is going to be productive.
Writing an offer.
Perfect. Do you have my PowerPoint right in front of you?
No.
Perfect. Writing offers is going to be productive. Good. How about negotiating offers is productive? All right. And closing. I think that's the last one. Okay, good. Yes. All right. So as you look at that, so let me ask you a question. Those are the only things that when we in real estate, if we are doing one of those, it's productive. Anything else that we are doing is either going to be indirectly productive or non-productive. So let me ask you, what do those things have in common?
They will all bring in.
Toes to toes and belly to belly to a client.
Okay, good. So toes to toes, belly to belly with a client. Good. So here's how I say it. Typically, for the most part, and granted, there's going to be exceptions, but every one of those you're in a face-to-face in a selling situation. You are face-to-face with people. And the other thing that I would add to it is every one of those items, the objective, the outcome you're looking for at the appointment is when you go and meet with somebody and you do a listing appointment. You go and meet with a buyer and do a buyer appointment. You're showing properties to a buyer that signed a buyer broker. You're getting a price reduction. You're writing offers. You're negotiating offers. You're closing. Every single one of those, the expectation at the end of that activity is somebody's going to sign something. Notice that? So you're face-to-face typically. Now, like I said, there's exceptions, and especially during COVID, we were doing a lot of Zoom appointments and stuff, but you're face-to-face with people in a selling situation that you're going to ask them to sign something. That's what makes it productive. Make sense? Okay, good. So now let's go to then indirectly productive. What would be indirectly productive? Well, prospecting is what's going to be indirectly productive. Anytime you spend door knocking or calling your sphere of influence, any of those things are indirectly productive. Now, here's why. Let me back up here. Of these items here, how many of those are you going to do if you never prospected? So who's like, I wonder who would be the newest licensee?
Probably me.
You think
I
it's
would
you?
say me, yeah.
Okay.
Probably. Is it you, Joan, or me?
I was May, first part of
March.
May.
Yeah.
Okay,
March.
so, okay, Joan,
May.
May. If you do no prospecting, you don't call anybody, you don't call your SOI, you don't tell anybody you're in real estate, how many of these are you going to do?
0.
Yeah, notice that. The way we get productive activities is through indirectly productive things. So prospecting is indirectly productive. When we are on the phone making calls, we're out knocking on doors, any of those things, we are being indirectly productive. So meaning that's how we get to these items is through the prospecting. Okay. All right. So then what's non-productive?
Building a website.
Yeah, building a website, good.
Maybe your marketing stuff.
Yeah, basically everything else. Every other activity that you do is non-productive. Now, remember, I'm going to keep saying this, that doesn't mean it's not important. Meaning like doing a CMA is important, right? But does doing a CMA fall into any of these categories? Nope.
No.
How about this? Nope. Therefore, it's non-productive.
But it brings you.
But it
to
brings you
productive.
your CMA, your comps. to
That-
get you
like I
that.
said, I'm in agreement with what you guys are saying, that it's, you're gonna have to do it. You're gonna have to spend time doing it. But that doesn't mean it's productive. Meaning, let me say it this way. 2 ways I'll say this. Number one, if you spent all day, every day doing CMAs, you never did anything but CMAs, how much money are you gonna make in this business?
Zero.
Nothing.
Well, you can charge for up to other agents to do CMAs.
Okay, oh, perfect, good. I love, that's where I was gonna go. I said two things. So that's the second thing. You could do it and charge other agents. How much are they gonna pay you to do that?
Well,
Not
it
much.
depends on.
Meaning if that's all you did all day as CMAs, at the end of the year, how much money are you gonna make? Like for real? Like how much money probably are you gonna make?
Personally,
Yeah, if all you did is CMAs for other agents, you're doing CMAs for other agents.
Maybe 30,000.
Yeah, maybe 30,000. So if that's the kind of income you want to make, then do non-productive activities. Because that's the point. See,
Yeah.
now let me back up and do this with you. What if, just what if, my whole entire day, I was going from listing appointment to buyer appointment to showing properties to a buyer that signed a buyer broker to getting price reductions and writing offers, negotiating and closing? What if I spent my whole day, like 8 hours? I was an hour and I went through all of these things all day, every day. That's all I did. How much
You
money
you would be Brian Burnett.
I would actually be even further along than Brian Burnett. Because does Brian Burnett only do those things all day, every day?
it's Brian Burnett.
Yeah, so Brian Burnett's our top agent.
Actually,
He
yeah,
made
because
$1 million
he-
last year.
he has a staff that does everything else.
Well, except for that's not true because does he do prospecting?
Oh, you're right.
See, so he doesn't spend
He
his.
does the indirect and
His
he
whole-
does
so-
IMT.
But here's the point. So I'm glad you brought this up because now watch what happens. Brian Burnett, who's our top agent in Utah, made about $2 million last year. He spends his day doing this productive and indirectly productive. See, I don't know that he knows what we're talking about, but intuitively he does what we're talking about.
Oh, he does because he doesn't even know how to work the copy machine.
Yeah, see, there you go.
I'm not kidding.
Which of these categories does working the copy machine fall under?
Right.
It's
Non-productive.
non-productive,
He
so
doesn't
his staff
Like,
does.
why
it.
does he need to know how to do it? I don't, because is it gonna make him any money to go make a photocopy? No. All right, so here's the point. Your objective should be, now, so let me go back. Even Brian Burnett making $2 million a year does not do this the entire day. If he did, he probably is making $5 million a year. If you could spend, so let's look at the contrast. If I spend my time doing CMAs, I make $30,000 a year. I do this, all my time's on these, I'm making $30 million a year. Which would you choose? Right? So, but here's the point. We don't get to do this. So even Brian Burnett at $2 million a year doesn't get to go do these things if he doesn't do his indirectly productive stuff. So he spends the morning doing this, the indirectly productive. And what Rebecca said is right on. Now, you're not going to be able to do this right out of the gate. Is you go hire somebody else to do all this stuff. See, you go pay somebody $30,000 a year to do your CMAs. You pay them $30,000 a year to go make your photocopies. You pay them $30,000 to do all the non-productive stuff, which is important. Now, so because for you, you're not in a position that you probably could go and pay somebody $30,000 a year right now to go do all that stuff for you. How do we, what do we need to do then instead? Well, here's what it needs to look like. So here's the secret. And this is, remember what I said to you, this is where it changed my career, was understanding this. Of your total time that you're going to spend working every day, your productive time plus your indirectly productive time should equal 60% of your time.
Or more.
Or, well, yeah, minimum. Sorry, that's probably the way to say it. It should be at least 60% of your time. Well, if that's the case, how much time does that leave for you to do non-productive stuff? 40%. So remember I said, that doesn't mean it's not important. We got to do it. Like, meaning, if Robert gets a listing appointment, he's got to do a CMA. And unless he's going to pay somebody else to do it, he has to do it. It's just, you need to make sure. So here's the key. Make sure that your time that you're spending every day working, at least 60% of your time needs to be spent between productive and indirectly productive. Well, so now let me back up again. This ties into my morning ascent again today. If I don't have any of this stuff to do, meaning let's go in reverse order. If I have no closings to attend today, then I should be, then I obviously am not going to spend time on that. So I should spend more. Well, actually, let me even back up further than that. What if you could spend your entire time in real estate just going from one, every day was I just went from one closing to the next? Like you probably are going to make $30 million a year if you did that. Well, okay, but I can't do that. So since I don't have any of those to do, then I should negotiate offers instead. Well, what if I don't have any offers to negotiate? Well, then I should be writing offers. Well, what if I don't have any to write? Well, I should try to get some price reductions then from my sellers. Well, what if I don't have any listings? Well, then I should be out showing properties to buyers who have signed buyer broker agreement. Well, what if I don't have any of those? Well, then you better get some buyer appointments or listing appointments. Well, what if I don't have any of those? Then I need to do this. See, so here's the point. So now let me go back to here. Every day, your day should be spent at the end of every day. Now, again, it's not going to happen every day, but your objective every day should be at the end of the day, 60% of my time was spent either on appointments, doing the face-to-face stuff. But what if I don't have any? Then I need to be indirectly productive, which is another way of saying prospecting. At the end of the day, if 60% of your time can have been spent in these areas. Now, one of the things you are going to notice is, to this point, have I told you how many hours you should be working? And I'm never going to tell you a number of hours you should be working, but here's what I am going to tell you. Whatever it is, however many hours you're going to work, 60% of your time needs to be spent in these two areas. Productive or indirectly productive. If you will do that, you'll make money in this business. If you don't, I can't guarantee it. So basically track every day. You should be tracking your time to seeing what that looks like. Now, so if you're finding that less than 60% of your time is doing that, you need more time prospecting. That's ultimately what it looks like. Okay. All right. Now, so I want to talk about schedule now. Okay. So here, I'm going to put up here on here what the ideal schedule would look like. Now, I get it that you're not going to be able to follow exactly this schedule every day, but there are some key pieces. And here's what I would tell you. So again, we brought up Brian Burnett. Every day he role plays on his way into the office. So between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning, as he's on his way into the office, he's doing some role play. So ideal scenario would be you're doing role play at 7 a.m. Okay, which we offer on Zoom. You can jump on or come here in person. So if you guys that are close by Union Park, come here, be in person. Otherwise, jump on Zoom and you can participate in the role play. Okay. 8 o'clock every morning, we do morning ascent. So either again, be in person here, or you can be watching it on Zoom. Although going forward, starting next week, hopefully, I'm crossing my fingers, we're really going to have this happen now, is Tuesday and Thursday is not going to be on Zoom. You got to be in person. So show up in person here. All right. 9 o'clock, start prospecting. Be on the phone prospecting from 9 until 11:30, 12 o'clock, somewhere in that range. Basically getting in your 3 hours worth of prospecting there. 1 o'clock is when do lead follow-up. So go eat lunch at 1 or noon, come back at 1, jump on and do lead follow-up, following up with the leads that you've generated in the past. 2 o'clock then is going to be appointment prep time. So you're preparing for your appointments. 3 o'clock was your first appointment. 5 o'clock would be a second appointment. And then if you have no appointments, I recommend go stop by some for sale by owners or expireds, doing what we had talked about last week in terms of that. Okay. And then I would also say typically what the top producing agents will do, and I know what Brian Burnett will do. Brian Burnett's goal, by the way, a lot of times people hear that he made $2 million and they think, oh, I wouldn't want that life. I don't want to work that hard. He is home. Other than one night a week, he's home by 6 o'clock for dinner is the plan. And he just schedules it looking something like this. One day a week, he'll do a 6 o'clock appointment. So you just have to decide what that's going to look like for you. Are you going to do it 1 day a week or 2? Well, so if somebody calls you and says, well, I want to work at 7 o'clock or meet at 7 o'clock, I'm sorry, I don't have any openings at 7, but I could do it at 5 or whatever, okay? So ideally, that's kind of what your schedule would look like. Now, in the event you have no appointments to go on or prep to do, that do more prospecting. Remember, that's basically go back to the indirectly productive scenario. All right, so let me get this down. I'm gonna put the board back up and we're gonna do some other stuff. Okay, so, but what questions do you guys have along the way first here? Before I jump into the next piece of this? Huh?
So morning is set, you guys on Tuesdays and Thursdays are not gonna have on Zoom.
That's,
Or
yeah, that's the
Wednesday.
plan at this, yeah, that's kind of the plan at this point is, because we want to get people back in the office showing up and doing it, so that part's subject to change. But I think initially, we're not gonna, Tuesdays and Thursdays, it'll just be in person.
Role play at 7, is that's Zoom?
That will be
You
on
do
Zoom
Zoom?
for sure, yeah,
Okay,
we'll still always do that.
and is it like you're listening to people doing role play or you're doing role play? with
Yes.
the group?
Both,
It's interactive.
Okay.
It's both. Yeah, so I think, were you on today, Robert?
No.
Okay, I got here right at the end and they were doing kind of a rapid fire kind of a thing where basically, okay, here's an objection and you gotta answer like quick kind of a thing. So they kind of do a different variations of things. So there are some people that get on and just say, I just want to listen and hear kind of what you're doing, and that's fine too. But otherwise, he'll throw you in the fire, give you some objections or, whatever. So, all right.
I highly recommend it, Russ.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like. So everything that I just showed you guys up there, essentially think of it. Think of it as, hopefully, can you guys see that on Zoom at all? Hopefully. Think of it this way, is this is kind of what it's looking like. I wish I had a better color. See if this one's any better. Not much.
Where?
It's light, but we can see it.
All right, well, I'll just kind of tell you what I'm doing. Okay, so think of it this way. So this line here is what we would call non-productive. Okay, this line going up, non-productive. This line going this way is going to be, I probably should label that differently. This one is non-productive. This one's productive. Okay. This is indirectly productive. So think of it this way. Any of the activities that you do that keep you on this line take you no closer to where you want to go. Ideally, we want to be on this line, which is productive. But to get there, we're going to have to do this, or Scott, I don't know if I said that right. This is productive. This is indirectly productive. In order to get to the productive, though, we have to do some indirectly productive that will then lead us back down that way, okay? This side of the line is counterproductive, which we aren't really going to talk about, but there are some things you could be doing in real estate that are actually counterproductive. So here's what I would recommend for you guys that you should do is, remember I said an attorney has to keep track every 7 minutes or 6 minutes, sorry, of where their time is being spent. I'm not telling you you need to do that, but here's what I would recommend that you do though, is you should do it from whenever you start working. So again, you'll notice I'm not ever telling you guys this is how many hours you should work, because there's no correlation. And in fact, actually, let me even say this first. My guess would be if we took a Brian Burnett and we tracked his time. So yeah, let me do this first. So let's just say I'm going to start my day at 8 a.m. What I would recommend, and I just realized I have a printout for this and I didn't bring it. So I'll get it for you. I have a printout that you guys can use to track your time with. So I will get that for you as soon as we're done here. And then for you guys that are on Zoom, if you want me to email it to you, throw your email in the chat box and I'll email this to you guys so you'll have it. If you don't, then I won't send it to you.
Hey, Russ, is there any way that we can get a PDF of the TIP and your different pages? Just, you had about 3 screens up that would have been nice because
Oh,
you.
sure, yeah. If you throw your email in the chat box and I'll send you the PowerPoint and this PDF of this, what we're talking about right here.
Thank
If
you.
want. Okay, so here's what I'm asking you to do, is whenever you start working, what I would recommend that you do is that you keep track of your time. Now, let me tell you about the story of how I went about this. So when I learned this concept, I then had the watch that I had, which in all of you guys have phones and or a smart watch that you can use, and either one's fine. But when I first learned this, we didn't have, I mean, we had phones, but they didn't have timers on them and stuff. And so I had a watch that was a Timex, an Ironman triathlete watch, like that was designed for the biking, swimming, and running kind of a thing. And on my watch, it had a timer. And I could set the timer so that the timer would go off every 15 minutes. So that every 15 minutes, it would beep. So what I would do is when I showed up to the office and I started working, I actually would start my timer. And then every 15 minutes, the timer would go off. Beep, 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 and I would hit reset and it would start over. Then what I did is I had a piece of paper, which I'm going to give you guys a copy of this. And then I would write down what I had done during that 15-minute window. So if, let's just say I was prospecting, I would have just written prospecting. Okay. Then 15 minutes would go by and it would beep, 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 beep. And I'd be great. Okay, what did I do? Went to the bathroom. I don't know, whatever. I'd write it down. 15 minutes would go by and I was like, had talked to Jeff. I would write it down. Now, then what I would do is after that, I would stop and say, okay, from 8 to 8:15, I was prospecting. So from what you guys have learned, what would I classify that as? Okay, good. So I would have put an I next to it as I was indirectly productive. Then I went to the bathroom. What's that? Yeah, so then I would have just put an N next to that. Then I was talking to Jeff. Yeah, I was gonna say, depending, I didn't clarify who that is, but whoever that is, Jeff is, but let's just say it was another agent in the office, came and asked me a question.
That would be.
Non-productive, right? So I was non-productive again. So what you want to do is you do that, and every 15 minutes for the whole day. Then at the end of the day, I would have written down, and let's just say for the ease of numbers that it was 10 hours. So I would have said my total time equaled 10 hours. And then I would look at how many 15-minute increments did I have that was indirectly productive? How many did I have that were productive? Now, which, by the way, if I went and met with a client, so if I went on a listing presentation or something, I didn't have my watch beep the whole time.
Well,
Like,
yeah.
okay, well, just making sure.
Of
So after, when I would go in to meet with them, I would shut it off. And then after I came out of the appointment, I would look at how long was I in there, and then I would write down what it was. So I then am going to write down what the productive time was for the day. So let's just say that I had one that day, an appointment, and it was for an hour. Okay. Then I would say, okay, how much time did I spend indirectly productive? And let's say that I looked at that, and at the end of the day, I had spent 3 hours prospecting. So I would have thrown in 3 hours there, which means everything else that I did. See, here's the key thing. The only things you really have to keep track of is your time that you're face-to-face in a selling situation or prospecting. Anything else you do, like write it down, but you don't have to stress about, was it indirectly productive, like it's pretty simple, because if it wasn't one of those items that we talked about that's face-to-face in a selling situation and it wasn't prospecting, then it was non-productive, which means I spent 6 hours non-productively. Well, based on the formula that I gave you, what does that mean? How much of my time was spent? Remember, I want to have these two added together equaling 60%.
Is it 40%?
So yeah, I was 40% here and 60% here, which means what?
You need to flip it.
It means I need to stop and look at Did I nearly need to spend that much time with Jeff? Did I need to really spend like that, that? So let me tell you about why this became so eye-opening for me. I did this for, initially when I started to do this, it was going to be for a 2-week period. I'm just going to keep track for 2 weeks of where my time was spent. And during that 2-week period, I had gotten a listing over a weekend. And on Monday morning, I went into the office, and similar to how we are at this office and most of the offices, we had a title company that was in the building. And in fact, actually the building that I was in, there was basically just a door like what we've got over here that you could have just walked through the door from the real estate office into the title company. They had just an adjoining door. Well, I got to the office. I had started writing this stuff down. It was 8 o'clock. I was prospecting. About 9 o'clock, I knew that the title company was going to have people there in the office. So I stopped prospecting. I went walking over to the title company, and the escrow officer, his name was Jeff, which is why I threw down Jeff there. But I went over to give Jeff, hey, I got a new listing. Remember, Crystal was talking last week, I think it was last week, about when you go get a listing, come, or maybe even somebody said it today. You did today.
Okay,
You
like
said,
say,
as soon as I get the listing, do I come and order the preliminary title report? Yes. So I had gotten a listing over the weekend. I go walking over to the title company to talk to Jeff, and Jeff and I are about the same age. Both of our kids, our oldest, were born within months of each other. I think 2 months apart from each other, and kind of had the same interests and stuff along the way. And so I remember I'd walked over and said, hey, Jeff, got a new listing. And he said, great, give me the information. I gave him the address. He wrote everything down about the new listing. And then I don't remember if he said to me or I said to him, but one of us said, hey, how'd your games go this weekend? And I don't know if it was football, baseball, basketball, whatever it was, but how'd your games go? And he starts telling me about how his games went. I'm telling him about our games. And the whole time my watch is on and would beep every 15 minutes. And he and I are sitting there talking, and he knew I was doing this, and I'd just reach over and, reset it. And we would sat and talk, and we talked. We get done talking. I get up, I go walking back across the office to get to my office. I go into my office, I close the door, and I started doing whatever it was I was doing. And my watch beeped. And I was like, oh, I got to record that I had gone over and talked to Jeff. So I go over to the piece of paper to write down that I had been over talking to Jeff. Now, I didn't take the paper with me. So when I met with Jeff, it wasn't like I had, I wasn't stopping and writing it down. So when I got back to my office to write it down, there's a big blank in here. So I had to write down visit with Jeff. And then I've got, filling in the blanks. Now, guess how much time I spent over talking to Jeff? I wish.
I'd say 2.
2 hours.
Yeah.
2 hours later, I went back to my desk and I had to write down that one experience changed my life in terms of real estate, because I had to stop then and write down visit with Jeff, and then I had to put non-productive. So at the end of the day, when I had to total this all up and I looked at it, and it was similar to what you're seeing here, 60% of my time was spent non-productively. I had to stop and look at it and go, okay, as good of a friend as Jeff is, do I really want to spend 2 hours of, is that where I want 2 hours of my day to be spent? And it totally changed my outlook, because I realized, remember I said work expands to fill the time available for its completion, and that we tend to work on the least important things first and most, and the least important things last and least. Well, that's what I found with this, is I noticed, see, if I wouldn't have been keeping track of this, and at the end of the day, you would have said, how much time did you spend over visiting with Jeff? I would have probably said to you about an hour. I would have said, yeah, probably an hour. When I saw I wrote it down and I was like, oh my goodness, I have wasted a lot of time. So here's what I will tell you. When you start tracking your time and doing this, what you're going to find is that you waste a lot of time. And you're going to see how much time you actually waste, that you're like, I actually was not very productive. So that's part of why as we talk about this, that I'm telling you now, with that background of looking at this, here's what I have found. The actual productive time, the top producing agents, I would guess if we were to go and look at Brian Burnett's time, that the amount of hours that he spends face to face with a client in a selling situation, the top producing agents typically are less than 33% of their time spent productively. So top agents still are only spending about a third of their time doing those activities up there where they're face to face with the client. Yet he's making a couple $1 million a year being productive 33% of the time. My guess would be when you guys start tracking this, and here's what let me just tell it to you this way. When I have tracked not new agents, but just agents who are productive, and I would say agents probably making $150,000, $200,000 a year, their time that they spend on, now we're talking only productive, I'm not including indirectly productive, but productive time, they typically are about 11% productive. Most of you that are new probably are 1 or 2% of your time is spent productively, meaning face-to-face with a client in a selling situation. Typically, that's what we find. Now, so here's the interesting thing. This is not linear. This piece of all of this is not linear, meaning that if you went from being 2% productive to 4% productive, or let me say it differently. If somebody goes from 10% to 20% productive, does not mean they're going to double their income. It's not linear. What it means is if I went from being 10% productive to 20%, my income's probably going to go up 4 or 5 times. So what I'm wanting you to see from this is you don't have to make big, huge increases in your productive time to make a lot of money. It's small little changes that you make. So that's the reason why what I'm saying is if you will track your time and see, so just spend the next couple of weeks just tracking it to see where is my time being spent. How much time percentage wise of the total hours that I'm working is spent productively or indirectly productive. And as long as it is 60% or more, you're good, keep doing it. But if you find like I did, where I was way less than 40%. Now, let me make sure that you guys are really clear. This that I'm talking about here is just productive time. This 40% was indirectly productive and productive. So you're including your prospecting and your face-to-face. And the beautiful part is if you don't have any face-to-face, you can fill that time with prospecting. So that's the importance of keeping track of it so that you can actually see, because here's the other problem is sometimes we will go and we will say we're prospecting from 9 until noon, but really it's like I make a phone call and something funny happens and I hang up and I go, Carmen, you got to hear this. This person I was just talking to, this is what they said to me. It was so funny. But it's like, honestly, I could spend a half an hour talking to her and then I go back but then I would record it as, oh yeah, I prospected from 9 to noon, but did you really? No. So that's where I'm saying is like that's why you have to do it in 15-minute increments. Because then if I do go over and start visiting with Carmen and my watch beeps or your phone timer goes off, beep, 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 I can go, oh, sorry, I gotta get back to prospect. It's kind of that subtle reminder of, and like for me, like I said, I sat there with Jeff resetting it over and over and over again for 2 hours. He knew what I was doing. I knew what I was doing, but I just kept resetting it. Didn't mean anything to me. But after that day, every time it went off and I would reset it, it meant something to me to look at it, to know, holy cow, I just wasted 15 minutes rather than spending 2 hours and still not recognizing that I wasted. Does that make sense? All right. What other questions?
I don't have questions, but I've thought, so to get even productive, would you say you have to like get up to the point where you can start being, because like you said, as a brand new agent, you don't know, that's not comfortable for you to be doing like listing presentations or yada, yada, yada. So just to even start this productively, would you have to get up to the point where like you're semi-comfortable with doing productive things?
Great question. Okay, good. Thank you. So here's the key. If you're not comfortable with it as a new agent, that's where you got to role play. You got to get involved in role play and just show, even if you don't show up to the company one, then get somebody. Say to Joan, hey, let's get together, you and I, and let's role play every day and schedule it into here, even though it's non-productive.
That's what I was saying too, is because then if you're doing the 60-40 rule, you have to be putting, say, 90% of your day in productive, or
Indirectly.
is that indirectly productive? Is that kind of the progression of this whole thing?
It is. Yeah. That's just it. Here, so let me actually say it this way. If you're 60%, you're okay. At 50, even at 50%, I would say you're still like, you could do better, but you're gonna be okay. But the moment you drop below 50% with these two, sirens should be going off. Like, the building's on fire, we stop, I gotta fix something. And part of it might be, honestly, part of it might be just for me, remember I told you that my objective was to set an appointment every day, and once I set it, I would go home. Well, part of the go home was be done working, because what I found is, see that 2-hour gap that I had right here with Jeff? If I eliminated that, that would have taken this from, and I'm just making up numbers, but from 10 to 8. And now all of a sudden, if I worked 8 hours and 4 of it was here, all of a sudden I'm at 50%. Now, even though I've said, I'm not telling you a number of hours, like what you can't do is go, okay, based on what Russ just said, I'm only gonna work 2 hours a day. I'll prospect for an hour and then I'll mess around for an hour and I'm at 50% and I'm gonna be okay. Like, I'm not saying that there's a magic number necessarily, because it's gonna vary, but it's gotta be at least enough for you to be able to see, like, meaning you're not gonna make a ton of money in this business if you say, I'm gonna work 2 hours a day in real estate. Like, that's probably not gonna work. Even though if you did that, if you were only gonna put 2 hours in, if you did put an hour of it into either appointments or prospecting, you're gonna be better off than the person who does 10 hours a day and still only prospects for an hour, yet feels like they were busy the whole time. Does that make sense? What else? All right. Let me look at my notes, see if there's anything I forgot, but I don't think so. So a little bit short today on class, but so for you guys that are here, I will run down and get the paper if you can hang out for a minute if you want it. I'll run down and get that printed off and I'll bring it back up for you guys. For you guys online, if you threw your email in the chat box, then I'll email it to you later today. But here's what I will tell you again. Let me just kind of wrap up with this. You should do this and track it for at least 2 weeks. And again, don't take 1 day's. If you do it 1 day and it ends up that you were like 10% between indirectly and productive time, don't be discouraged. Don't judge off of 1 day. But if after 2 weeks you combine it all together and look at it and it's like that, now's when you kind of go, okay, I got to change some stuff up here. Then I got to figure out how to be a little bit more productive and indirectly productive with my time. So that's why I was telling you, this friend of mine, his name's Craig. When I went to lunch with him a few years ago and I said, hey, are you still doing that? He said, yes. Anytime I feel like I'm not on track or my business isn't going properly, I immediately pull out that paper and start tracking my time to see where did I get off track. Because there is a principle in the universe that I just lost the term for it. Basically going from order to chaos.
Oh.
What's the word in science? Entropy. Thank you. Yeah, basically entropy happens, is meaning if I build a building out in the desert and nobody did anything with it for 10,000 years, what's going to happen to that building? It's good, yeah, it'll be rust, basically.
Yeah.
That's entropy, is going from order to chaos. If you don't manage it, and so to kind of wrap this up, back to where we started this with the law of the work expansion, work expands to fill the time available. If not managed, entropy takes over and your business goes off track. So you got to keep track of this stuff. That's how when you start to get off track, you go back to this and realize I'm spending too much time visiting or whatever it is you're doing. Make sense? All right, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all. I will, I'm gonna go grab that for you guys that are here. And then I'll email it to the rest of you guys later today. Actually, let me try real quick and see, I might be able to throw it into, let's see if I can find it fast, and I'll just drop it in the chat box for you guys. Here.
Really?
It's pretty much extra paper because they're full, because I gotta go.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll
Huh. Why do you have to go? And you have to
go with me.
Those
There.
doors.
I guess
Yeah.
I'm his assistant.
All right, so for you guys that are on the computer, it's in your chat, it should be in the chat box now. I'll still email it out to you, so.
I don't know if this causes.
I don't see it, so hopefully you'll email it.